to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today we are going to circle back on a disturbing story, but one that we've covered extensively here. And of course, that is Madeline Soto. Just to let you know, this is now the second show that we've done of the day because we had a press conference about these mothers in Kansas, both murdered in a custody dispute. One was essentially, I hate to say this, collateral damage in the wrong place at the wrong time. So that is another horrific story, but we've got more information, and we're doing a full episode on that coming up at 7. So it is a very busy Monday here, but glad that you can join us. And just to recap a little bit about Madeline Soto, in February, the 13-year-old disappeared. It prompted a statewide missing child alert. Officials confirmed just a few days later that her body was found in rural Osceola County. That, as I said, was just days after she was reported missing. Now, Stephan Sterns, who was her mother's boyfriend, still might be, we don't really know, is now considered the prime suspect in Madeline's disappearance and murder. And he's accused of moving her body in the morning hours of Monday, February 26th. Of course, that was a school day, and the day prior was her 13th birthday, which a lot of people think could have been a trigger for all this. He is believed to have murdered her in Kissimmee. That is according to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Now, everyone's been waiting on the ME's report, and I don't think we're ever going to find out exactly what happened. We'll explain why during the course of this show. And Stephan Sterns, since we last discussed this case, has waived his right to hear the charges levied against him. Without further ado, a first-time best guest, Julia Cowley. She is a retired FBI agent and profiler, spending 22 years in the FBI investigating violent crime, including serial killings and sex offenses, white-collar crime, public corruption, and civil rights. She was also a member of the FBI's evidence response team. Prior to joining the FBI, Julia was a special agent and a forensic scientist with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, which is the agency working on Sebastian Rogers' case as we speak. She has a bachelor's degree in chemistry and a master's degree in forensic science, so she brings a really unique perspective. I bet if you saw Julia Cowley at Whole Foods, you would not think she's this badass FBI profiler agent, would you? But you never know who is who. On the other hand, you might look at David Nutting and say, yes, this guy was definitely a former homicide detective and cold case supervisor in both Orange and Volusia counties in Orlando. And then Darby Fox. I love her. She just gave my kid a little bit of advice, my beautiful daughter, Vita. She had a little life issue at school today, so we were picking Darby's brain, and it was good advice, as I expected. Darby is a child and adolescent family therapist with over 25 years of experience with children and families from diverse backgrounds. She has a book, Rethinking Your Teenager, Shifting from Conflict and Control to Structure and Nurture to Raise Accountable Young Adults. Vita, if you're listening, I want you to be an accountable young adult. Darby does all the media outlets, CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox News, Newsmax, the list goes on. You see her all over the television. David Nutting, to you, this is not exactly what I planned to start with, but one of the things about this defendant, Stephan Sterns, we were going to take his arraignment live. He waived his arraignment. I didn't even think that was possible. What's the deal here? He just didn't want to hear formally the charges read against him, and he doesn't have to sit there before a judge.
Right. I think he's probably just finds himself in a rather deep, dark place right now. He just doesn't want to face the music, so to speak. And he's not legally obligated to appear in person, so he makes all his appearances through his attorney. So,
But that doesn't affect in any way the way he's charged, correct? I mean, it's just he just
correct.
doesn't want to hear it.
Right. I mean, ultimately, he will have to appear in court, once this goes to trial, or, even if he pleads, I believe he will have to attend those hearings. If he decides not to take it to trial, just plead straight up, or, make some kind of arrangement with the prosecutor.
Annie K, friend of the show, the most important people, the COE, not me. I'm not T-Pain, our mod, Space Coast, who handles all the technological aspects. Shaquille O'Neal, you got Gen X Granny, you got Frankie Figs. I know I'm forgetting one, but I don't mean to, because you're all equally important. These guys work day in and day out, really help us. Frankie Figs, by the way, sent me the PCA, otherwise known as the probable cause affidavit, for the 7 o'clock show, which I'm hoping the COE can get to and break down some parts for the 7 o'clock. But Darby, to you, I told you I would forget one. And Copper Horse is from Jersey, so she's my home state. She should be number one. Copper Horse, you know that there was no ill intent there at all. The profiler and the psychologist will tell you that. And it is Shaq's birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday to the best name in all the YouTubes, Shaquille Oatmeal. Darby Fox, psychologically speaking, and I think we could also ask the same question of Julia as well. But what about the fact this guy is avoiding he waived his first appearance, if I remember correctly, and then he waived his arraignment. He doesn't want to be in the courtroom, doesn't want to hear charges read against him. What do you think is happening there psychologically?
It's hard to say. There could be a variety of things, but I would imagine it's partially denial. If he doesn't hear it, he doesn't have to face the music. When you hear over 60, without even being convicted of a murder, over 60 charges of different child battery and molestation things, that's pretty grim. I don't know how you could sit there and listen to that and keep it together. I think he really is trying to maintain some composure, and I think he got caught. He knows he got caught, and it's like, okay, I don't need to hear it.
Yeah, you never want to let yourself hear horrible things about your own self, but that's what he's going to be forced to do. You heard David say he's going to have to eventually appear in court. But Kimberly Boyer here, Boyer, I think I'll go with that. What is this waiving thing to Julia? Who's allowing this? This is his constitutional right, I believe. It's ridiculous and such a smack in the face for the victims. What is this world coming to? Unbelievable. What do you make of this? I mean, I know you have a strong scientific and sort of a psychological. You have a whole mixed bag, Julia. Is there anything? Someone said to me he's probably terrified because if he is convicted on these charges, this is the worst type of crime you can go to a state prison with, which is the murder of a child. Is that part of it, do you think, or he just doesn't want to be called out by a judge for these types of charges?
I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of denial, as Darby said. He doesn't want to face the consequences of what he's done. He doesn't want to be held accountable. And I'm not surprised. And I will tell you, it's been my experience in the federal system. I cannot recall, at least in the cases that I was involved in, of a defendant who's charged with this amount, or even a small amounts of possession of child sexual abuse material that end up going to trial. I've never seen a trial in my own world, I should say. So I'm not going to speak for that. These are the statistics, but that's my experience. They don't go to trial. These crimes are the most horrendous crimes that people face, and they know if they're convicted and if they have to sit through this trial, it is just one of those types of crimes that no one has tolerance for, and it's almost indefensible. And so many of these defendants end up pleading guilty just so they don't have to face it.
Mm. Julia, I wanted to ask you, I'm always curious. Again, just I would never think. My first thought would not be that you're an FBI agent. I don't mean that in a negative way at all. It's just, I think the movies have created some sort of, I don't know, bias maybe about what I'm expecting an FBI agent to look and feel and act like. But what got you motivated to join the TBI and then the FBI? What was it about becoming an FBI agent that was of interest to you?
Well, it goes back to my childhood. I read Helter Skelter by Vincent Bugliosi, and I read that at a pretty young age. I think I was in middle school. And from then on, I was only interested in reading true crime, following true crime, and I knew I wanted to do something in law enforcement. I didn't know what. I was gifted in science, I guess, and I really liked chemistry, biology, and I don't know if you remember back in my day in high school, you couldn't just go on the internet and look for majors and different types of career paths, but we had these big books that were like the size of a big phone book, and it had all different majors in it. And I was just reading through it, and I saw police science, and that was really what forensic science was. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to go into forensic science. And then I did, and I worked in the crime lab, and I went out to homicide scenes and was part of a team that would process the homicide scenes. And then I had a colleague who joined the FBI. And a couple of years later, I also decided to join the FBI. I don't know that I set out to join the FBI, but once I made the decision, I knew that when I got into the FBI, I was hoping that someday I would become an FBI profiler, even though the chances were slim. You don't just walk in like the movies and become a profiler. But that's, in a nutshell, my path. And I'm not offended at all. I get told that all the time. Like my daughter once said to me, I was on the phone and it was a work call, and she's like, "You have two personas." She's like, "You're totally different. You're my silly mom, and then you get so serious." And it works to my advantage sometimes. I think in some of the investigations, it can work to my advantage that I don't come across as maybe what one would expect in law enforcement. Sometimes it's a disadvantage as well, but I found it to be an advantage.
I know a few CIA officers, and one I grew up with, and I've known him since second grade. And he's out of the CIA now. His name is Mark Polymeropoulos. Very well known. He does a lot of media. You just never suspect. He was this short little guy that got recruited out of Cornell, and then he rose to the very, very top of the ranks in the CIA. He was at the Baghdad airport before the war ever began, and was dressed up like Taliban, hiding in mountains in the middle of all the chaos after 9/11. He did some really courageous things. He has a book out, by the way, called Crisis and Clarity. And I literally have known him since second grade. So you never know what someone's going to end up doing. I just wish everything I personally have ever done in my life has been by complete accident. Becoming a reporter, becoming a podcaster, getting into true crime. My dad always said, have a plan. My dad was a doctor, and I just never had a plan. So I'm always curious. I digress for a moment. We'll get back to this. But Annie K., and this, of course, is for retired homicide detective David Nutting. Is law enforcement still interviewing Madeline's mom to get more information or to implicate Stephan Sterns, or both? What is, in your opinion, happening behind the scenes, David Nutting? And then you got Frankie Figgs. I read Helter Skelter at age 15 as well. But David Nutting, what do you think's going on right now with this investigation?
I would suspect at this point, unless she's really just a horrible decision maker, which she may be, she's retained counsel. I wouldn't think that anybody in the right mind would be in this position that she's in without having attorney representation. They had the initial statement from her. They probably did a couple follow-up interviews. But you have to be careful. There's really a limitation on how many times you can interview somebody before it becomes completely, convoluted. So It's one precaution that you have to take in investigations is you have to know when to stop interviewing people. And I would suspect they probably have everything that they need at this point in terms of what her final version is, what the timeline is, where she was in the hours and day, at the very least, leading up to the disappearance of Maddie. So they're probably done, I would say, with the interviews with Maddie's mom at this point.
Julia, in your bio, I forgot to mention the Consult podcast. Tell us a little bit about it. What do you guys discuss? Someone here, Beth, I just listened to it last night. One of my faves.
Thank you. The Consult it's a podcast that I do with 3 other retired FBI agents and profilers. I worked with them in the FBI's behavioral analysis unit, and we discuss cases, both solved and unsolved, and looking at criminal behavior. The purpose of the podcast too is to show what profiling really is and how it can benefit. I think some people think that criminal profiling is the be all end all, some kind of magical powers. Other people think it's completely useless. We try to show it's just somewhere in between and how it can help solve cases. And so we have 2 purposes. We want to talk about solved cases so that people can learn how it helped, how it assisted, where we were right, where we were wrong, why we were right, why we were wrong. And then also we cover unsolved cases to keep them in the spotlight.
Which is always super important. Wait a minute now, from Karen Twirly's mom, Bachelor. I just got on. That sounds like the host of the Consult pod. Love her and love her pod. Followed same person. I always thought she'd be a best guest on STS, and I can already tell we are going to have Julia back on if she's willing to do so once we get through this entire show, if she's still wanting to do that. Darby, do you have a podcast? And if you don't, why don't you?
I don't have a podcast, and that's a good question. I spoke about that to someone. I do a lot of smaller clips, short clips, and then just seeing lots of clients one-on-one. It's kind of hard to find all the time, but I do podcasts as opposed to having my own.
And Darby, I have a possible proposition for you to talk about off air. So we'll related to that. So we'll discuss it. So one of the things that's happened since the last time we discussed this, well, there's been a few things, but Maddie Soto's biological father, he is a guy named Tyler Wallace, and he spoke exclusively to WFTV in Orlando. So kudos to FTV. Here's just a couple of short bites, and we might be able to actually pull something a little longer. The COE and I got derailed today for a number of different reasons, so I apologize about that. But the father, Darby, said, I love what I had of her, but we were supposed to have so much more. Maddie was just the most important person to my wife and I. Obviously, it has been a very short amount of time, almost infinitesimal compared to how long it will take to process this, but they always talk about, grief going in different stages. Where do you think the father is right now with all this?
I think he's I saw that clip too. I think he's in the very, very beginning stage of disbelief. He didn't live with her. He lived in Texas, and there's just slow tear going down his face. I think he just doesn't even know how to wrap his head around what happened. And I think it's going to be a little bit. And I think the important thing to think about grief is it isn't linear stages. It's kind of bouncing all over, in and out, like disbelief, then anger, incredible sadness. He'll kind of go all over the map. But I think right now, just hearing the details of, and he's got to feel guilty to some extent. Like, because we're talking 8 to 13, that's nearly 5 years of what was happening to his daughter. And I don't know, as a parent, how you could ever even forgive yourself. Like, there's something that's got to have been missed. And I think that both David and Julia, you could speak to that. Like, there's always something we should have picked up on beforehand. And I think that that's kind of what he's going through.
That's a great point. I think he is. And there was talk, and I'll get to that as well, that he really, for the most part, was just communicating with her because, as you said, he lives in Texas and she was in Orlando, and he would communicate via social media. Julia, I'm just wondering, I mean, there's so much to deconstruct here, but kind of from a from a profiling aspect, is there a way to categorize the types of people like the Stephan Sterns who commit these crimes? Is there any category that they all share in common or a common denominator?
I would say if you're going to look at a common denominator, well, first of all, I want to say there's like no one profile. You're gonna find differences, but you're going to find potentially some similarities, some personality traits and characteristics. What we don't know about him is if he's the type of offender that is situational, that he's only going to offend because Maddie was available to him, or is he someone that is going to go outside of the home and also look to offend? We don't know that yet. We don't know the scope of his offenses, and that could change how we would view him or view his type of predator characteristics. That would be the thing I would be looking for, and I'm sure they are looking to see if there are other hands-on offenses that he's committed. But you do have a certain type of an offender that may only offend in a certain, because it's available to them in the situation, and they may not be looking to offend outside of that dynamic. We don't know that about him yet. And is it possible, other relationships he's been in, has he had access to other children? That's certainly something that will be part of this, what I would say is probably a very large scale investigation of him and his background, and not only his background, but his personal background, but his background on the computer, on the phone, who's he communicating with. It's going to be extensive.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of fears, I think, out there that this could have been a much wider problem, a conspiracy, that he was doing this to other children. So that's a good point. That
you always have to consider that. But but it also is possible that there may not be another victim. We want to say it has to be, but maybe not. We don't know for sure. And I think the investigation will end up telling us that, because I've seen murders where you look at them and you think this person has had to have done this before. 20 years pass, they get caught, and then you find out they had never committed a similar crime either before or after that crime. So, I think it's always best to just wait and see how the investigation unfolds. But to go back to your question about some characteristics that people like this have in common, there's obviously a lack of accountability. There is a rules do not apply to me attitude, and it's selfish. And that is a term that doesn't quite capture what he is, but he is the type of person, or I shouldn't say he, but generally offenders like this put their own needs before everybody else's.
Yeah, there were reports out there. David Nutting, I'm not sure if it was ever confirmed that he worked at Disney World as well. David, do you know if that was ever confirmed by any chance?
I haven't heard that, but Disney is the largest employer in Central Florida by far. So a lot of people, and he did live in close proximity to Disney World. So certainly Disney or any other of the theme parks would be readily available for him to work. Whether that if he has around a bunch of children, like Julia said, he may not offend on those children, but Maddie being home, being available, might have, unfortunately for her, might have, his desires might have manifested into her availability, right? So I don't know that he would be necessarily molesting children at Disney World, right? But
Yeah. By the way, Sharp, we have, I always say, best guest, better community. We have one of the best true crime communities. Sharp Tack saying he worked at Epcot, and then Black Widow from the Republic of Ireland saying that he was subcontracted to Disney. But I mean, knowing that, David, do you have to go and interview former employees, former coworkers, and see what was going on there? Because that is literally and figuratively Disney World for pedophiles. I mean, that's where they would love to be.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that, I mean, Disney employs tens of thousands of people, so there are occasionally stories that come out of pedophiles that do get arrested with connections to Disney through employment at one time or another. So it's not unheard of. That is absolutely true.
We're welcoming in people who are just watching the Chad Daybell trial on channel number 2, the COE or Space Coast. I'll put that link up. But we are covering the Chad Daybell trial, gavel to gavel, on our Best Trials channel. And we made the decision, Space Coast, the COE, and myself, and we are going to air the Karen Reed trial on this channel. The Karen Reed trial on this channel. They are not allowing cameras in for jury selection. I see that. Thank you, COE. They're not allowing cameras in for jury selection, but either by the end of the week or next week, it will be the Karen Reed trial. And for those of you who do not know about that trial, it is so convoluted, so many nuances to that case. And for full disclosure, I have not been able to follow it the way I would like to, but I will watch this trial as much of it as I can. And then on big days, we'll have analysis of Karen Reed. But that's a trial that in Boston is literally dividing a city. It's either your free Karen Reed or on the other side of that. And it's kind of wild to watch. This is the channel with Chad Daybell, youtube.com @surviving. It's cut off there, but I guess people on here can click on it, but it's Surviving the Survivor Trials. Surviving the Survivor Trials. The COE was able to pull sound. There you go. Surviving the Survivor Trials. This is Tyler Wallace. This is the biological father of Madeline Soto. Let's listen to this and we'll get the panel's reaction. Here we go.
You find out?
I was informed through a phone call from Jennifer that she was missing. We weren't sure if she was actually missing or if she was staying at a friend's house at the time. We were trying to wait to see if she showed up, and by the second day I couldn't wait anymore. So I drove down to Florida. I love what I had of her, but we were supposed to have so much more, and I can't grasp it. I can't grasp it.
Darby, obviously tough to watch. Your reaction?
That it's what I alluded to before. I think he just doesn't how could my little daughter, could this have happened? He can't wrap his head around it, especially from the distance. It doesn't, if someone's in your home all the time, it seems different. He just what is going on here? I think he's in shock, to be honest. His wife actually has a very good clip. I don't know if you have that, which is more thorough, and she can speak about her anger and everything to the thing. I think he's just kind of in shock. He doesn't know what to say or do.
I think all those things are correct. I'm just thinking, because I was in media, and I guess still in media and new media, but I was part of this old gang of reporters. And I just never understand. I have a very hard time when I was in the business, and even now, asking these parents so close to this tragedy to speak. But I don't know why he felt compelled. I mean, Darby, do you have a thought on that? Is it cathartic for him to speak out?
I don't know if it's cathartic for him to speak out, but again, without making a lot of assumptions, I think you get caught up in the moment where there's a lot going on. They've interviewed Jennifer. There were those clips of Stearns. So I don't know if he just feels that's something you should do. I personally think I know a lot of people who would not want any coverage at all, and you do see that frequently. So I think he's just kind of not sure what he's supposed to do. He's just heard this, and I don't think it's well thought through either way. I think it's just a response.
Yeah. And his wife spoke at a vigil, which we'll talk about. But David, go ahead. Was that you?
No, I was just, Julia was talking about the BAU, and although profiling is a tremendous aspect of what the BAU does, but my experience to work the BAU to develop interview approaches for people who are in prison, suspected serial killers, and so the BAU and Julia could probably speak to this a lot more so than I can, but he hasn't been charged in the murder yet. So if I'm part of the team that may or may not reach out to the BAU, say, hey, what's the best interview approach we could go and talk to him, because the Sixth Amendment hasn't attached because he hasn't been charged with the murder. So in theory, if he's still approachable for that murder case. So I'd be interested, Darby, to hear what you kind of think about what, and I know you probably you haven't seen, but like an interview approach with Sterns, like what do you think might be something would be quite interesting?
Well, I think with Sterns, I agree with you. That was the biological father, and it is a little bit of a strange affect it's a little disconnected, but we know he wasn't involved in the murder.
Right.
Did this family cover up some other stuff, or at some point did their little girls say something like, I don't want to go back there? Those are the kind of thoughts that would come to my mind, especially seeing that affect was a little off. I'm not going to judge because he just lost his daughter in the most awful, heinous way you could. But I do think in interviewing Sterns, it would be interesting to really go more at the piece that he probably can't control, and that's his affection for Maddie. Because in these cases, often that's the one piece that we do see kind of across. There's some disturbed relationship with control. And I would kind of think he would lose it if you could interview questions that kind of went at attachment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And Julie, I think you probably have been involved in a number of those requests to develop interview strategy for people that are in. I know we used the BAU on a case where a guy suspected serial killer who was serving time for a double homicide, and we reached out to BAU to develop an interview strategy to go interview this guy, and BAU was quite helpful. In that respect.
I'm curious, Julia. How does that work? You do get requests, I guess, from different homicide divisions. When you get a request like David is talking about, let's say if it was David working this case and he said, hey, Julia, how do I best approach Stephan Sterns? How do you crunch the numbers for that, so to speak? Okay,
so I'm going to tackle this question and kind of back up a little bit. As David knows, if you call BAU and you want an interview strategy, we're not just going to give it to you like, oh, here's a magical strategy. Most of the time, if there's time, we want all the information about that particular subject that you're going to interview. And we don't just do interview strategies for suspects or suspected serial killers. We do them for potential witnesses that might be difficult and they're important. So you want to find out as much information as possible. So if there is an opportunity to interview Sterns, that's what you want to do. What are his vulnerabilities? How do we make him vulnerable to law enforcement? Let's say we don't have that, because I know people are going to want to know, well, okay, what would you do right at this moment? So what we would do is we'd go back and look at what information we do have. And let's say this is an emergency. We don't know for sure that he's done it. He's on the street. They need to talk to him. So that's the scenario I'm putting forward. I know that's not what reality is, but just give you an idea how we would approach it. We would look at his prior statements that he said. I think the statement that he made to the news station was quite helpful. and pulling out themes. And so in terms of like a statement analysis, what I want to say is we don't look at statements and we don't use that as conclusive evidence of veracity or deception. We're looking at statements for potential leads or potential areas of focus. And so one of the things that I noticed when he was interviewed, it is a brief clip, and it looked like it might have been cut together, so there might be more to it that I didn't have access to. But he starts off, or at least at the beginning part of his interview, says something to the effect, the day started like any other day, or the morning started like any other day, something like that. Or the morning started off like any other day. I don't quote me, but right there, I think what stood out to me, and I'm going to be cautious with what I say because I don't want people to think, okay, this means he did it. But when you use the word started, to me, that implies you started something but didn't finish it. And so it started normal. So what happened that made that morning not normal? So that, to me, I look at, that's an area of focus here that you want to go back and you want to clarify what happened. Why isn't that day normal? The other thing that I think is interesting is that he talks about just the day starting out. It started off normal. Shouldn't the whole day have been normal up until the point that she's found out to be missing? He should have had a normal day. But that's not how he starts off. So that was a huge red flag to me right off the bat. And again, I don't want to say that just means he did it. It could mean a lot of things, but there is something there to me. And I would start there. And so if we look back and we think, and again, I'm just trying to come up with something if investigators needed it at that moment based on the information that we have. So what that tells me is that it's possible she was not killed during the night, that she had a normal night. She went to bed. Day started off as normal or as any other day. Something happened and likely something he didn't plan. And so that's the theme I would use. You didn't mean to. And it kind of goes back to what Darby was saying about the, kind of the complicated situation sometimes when you have an abuser like that. And going back, something happened. You didn't mean to hurt her. You would never hurt her. So that's kind of what I would do just based on what he said. This was an accident that had to be an accident. I wouldn't start off right there, but that's the theme. And that would be how I would start treating him. But I just think how he started that interview tells me something, and it tells me an area to go back and focus on and maybe, and then also, they've talked about the pronouns he uses and I've seen other interviews, so just because you change pronouns doesn't necessarily mean you're guilty, but that's an area of, okay, when he's saying I did this versus we did this, what's the difference? What is the difference in the statement and why is he changing pronouns? Again, an area of focus, something to look on, something to maybe perhaps go back. And that's the purpose of analyzing these statements, is to try to construct some type of interview strategy. That's one of the purposes.
Super fascinating.
Love
that. Tyler Wallace, the biological dad, said he last spoke to Maddie on her birthday, which was the day before, and then he drove when he got anxious about where she was. Drove from Texas to Florida. Again, he said that he mainly communicated with Maddie. This part I found a little odd, just through social media. Darby, what do you make of that? I mean, it's a different world, but I have 3 kids. I would never want to just communicate through social media. Did you find that a little? I don't think this guy has anything to do with it, and I think he's shell shocked. But what about the fact that their relationship though was based on talking through social media?
Yeah, I don't think that's a terribly close relationship. And the fact that, he spoke to her on her birthday and then didn't really follow up when he heard he was missing. I think he's just not that close to her. He lived far away. I think I could be wrong, but he hadn't seen her since October is something I read. So I could be wrong on that. I could have that off, but that really struck me. You've got a little 12-year-old and you haven't seen her for a few months. That's strange. And it didn't really talk about any of the times they'd spent together. So again, I don't think he was involved, but there's something that's not great about that relationship. And I would imagine he feels, guilty at that stage, like to hear all that, like, what did I miss? Or how could I have let this happen? I don't think they were really close.
Yeah, I definitely get that sense, which doesn't minimize the fact that he's grieving the way he is. But Julia, I'm curious to you on this, and I'll go to Dave on a separate question. But from Roff and Roffer, could her mom really, Jennifer Soto, never have known about the 5 years of Maddie being abused? At first, they said it went back a couple years. Then they said it went back to maybe the age of 7 or 8. What do you think? Is there any way the mother was completely in the dark about this?
I don't know.
No way to tell.
I think it's very hard to fathom that she didn't know something, wasn't aware of something, was ignoring something, or could have been ignoring something. I think it's hard to fathom that, but I don't know. It's also hard to fathom a mother knowing this information and allowing it to happen. But we've seen that.
You see that?
You see that. So I think it will remain to be seen what she knew, when she knew it. And I know a lot of attention has been paid to her statement and the lies she told. And I'm not convinced that her lies were because she's necessarily covering up a murder. She might be, but it could also be impression management. She's trying to make it look like she's a good mom, that she did see Maddie that morning. She did take her to school when in fact she wasn't present. And that could just be wanting everyone to think she's a good mother, even though maybe she knows she wasn't where she needed to be for Maddie. So I mean, I have questions about, like everyone else. What did she know and when did she know it?
Tyler Wallace, the biological father, at the end of this interview says that he does not believe what the mother of his child, Jennifer Soto, is saying. He doesn't believe it adds up. And I have some examples that we'll get into in just a moment. But this is really peculiar to me, David Nutting, and maybe you can shed some more light on it. Why has all this time passed and he has not been charged with murder? And Rosemary's question is, what will it take to charge the stepfather, Stephan Sterns? He's the boyfriend, not the stepfather, but
right. I mean, the short answer is it's going to take the concurrence of the prosecuting authority. It's going to take the state attorney's office to say, yes, we are confident that we can take this case and we can prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the short answer. The longer answer is, I guess the medical examiner I read will not release the manner or the cause and manner of death in this particular case because she is a juvenile and she's a victim of domestic violence. So what that tells me, reading between the lines, is that there's probably a homicide, right? Because they said she's a victim of domestic violence. So, but we don't know, it hasn't been released yet exactly what she died from. So a difficult situation, and I've been personally involved with a couple of these cases that are still to this day remain unsolved, where a child dies in a house where two adults are present, and if neither adult confesses or provides information, you're not able to say which person actually killed the child. So but based on my experience, that is probably the most significant hurdle they have at this point. they start pointing the finger at each other, then it's a he said, she said, and then so they have to be absolutely certain that Sterns committed the murder, because his defense may be, and I'm just being hypothetical here, is that no, the mother killed her, and I just helped get rid of the body. So that's a difficult thing for the prosecutors to overcome, and it's happened in a number, at least 2 cases that I know of personally, that in Orange County's jurisdiction that were never, to this day, remain unsolved because 2 adults were present and we could never prove to the state's liking who actually murdered the child, even though we're pretty confident that it was the male that did it.
Wow. There you have it. You've got to have the evidence to back it up, and sometimes it's too murky. I hope that they will be able to figure this out, but this is a perfect example, I think, of how difficult investigating any kind of crime is, but specifically this kind of crime when you've got Stephan Sterns and then his girlfriend so like tightly enmeshed, you don't know necessarily who's doing what or what role the other had. Back to Julia, a couple of questions for you. When you're, kind of profiling or looking at these types of men, predominantly men, who commit this kind of SA against young girls or young boys, do you find that the majority of them have themselves been abused in their past? In other words, if you go into Stephan Sterns' history, are the odds pretty great that you're going to find out that he suffered the same sort of abuse at the hands of someone else?
Anecdotally, I would say, and I don't know the statistics. I think statistics would say if someone becomes an abuser, they've likely been abused. So that could be his history. The cases that I have been a part of, I would say it's about 50-50. There is oftentimes also just physical abuse, not necessarily a background of sexual abuse. And there's oftentimes some sort of trauma or experience or neglect that is just intangible, some sort of abuse, emotional abuse that you just can't ever verify with some of these offenders. But I would say it's probably 50-50 on the cases that I've worked that we found that a child sex offender was also, and that's just I'm just estimating based on my own work. I'm not talking about statistically, but I do believe statistics would show that is probably quite high.
Darby, what are your thoughts on this mother? I mean, do you think that there's any chance that she could have been in the dark about this abuse for that period of time? Is that possible? Keeping in mind, they also lived in a fairly small apartment. It wasn't like a big home with multiple levels, things of that nature. Do you think that it's possible she just didn't know?
I mean, I don't believe so. I don't know. It's hard to say what she did know. I don't want to go that far, but I would think she would know that there is an abnormal relationship between her boyfriend and her daughter. And what David just said about them not charging one person or the other is an idea that I have thought about, where you could see that something happened. What broke between 8 and 13? We see that often. And then about 13, when kids start to develop more and could be more independent or more likely believed, we see the abuse stop a lot. But something happened that cut that off. Was that rage of the mother? We do see moms where they feel like their kid has taken their lover. It's absurd, but we do see that a fair amount. Was there something that broke there? I don't believe, I have no idea how much she knew, but her nervousness, her continual shaking, the changed story. Do you not know if you did see your daughter or you didn't? She's covering up something. And did she let it go? Did he tell her it wasn't that bad, that he was just close to her, but he didn't really touch her? I mean, I don't know, but she should be accountable for neglect. You've got to know something was astray. That was 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard at the very least. I think at the very least has to be negligence, and at the very most, a lot more sinister than that. Older, wiser here. David Nutting, what are the chances, if any, that this guy would ever cut some sort of plea deal? How would that work in a case like this?
Well, the sexual on the sexual assault charges, I really don't think a plea is on the table. It's probably going to be life, or I don't think the state's going to give him a plea. So he's going to have to plea straight up and just spend the rest of his life in prison or go to trial. I think that's going to be probably the deal, especially with the new prosecutor in the Ninth Circuit that does, plays pretty hard ball. As far as the murder case goes, it's really tough. If you look at I'm sure they're looking at lesser included offenses. Maybe some way they could charge both parents, child abuse resulting in death, aggravated child abuse, some type of ongoing, to try not to overcharge so they can get some measure of justice, versus, another notorious case in Orange County was, of course, the Casey Anthony case that was really took us all in. It took a number of us in for a long time in that case, and they charged first degree murder, tried the death penalty, and they found her not guilty. So I think there's still, that still resonates somewhat in the Ninth Circuit. We have to be really careful about charging in these types of cases, making sure they don't overcharge. Maybe there's a lesser included crime that may be more appropriate, that may be easier to prove. So I'm sure there's many, many discussions going on between homicide division chiefs, detectives, prosecutors to try and figure out the appropriate charge if they can't prove which person actually killed Maddie.
By the way, Darby has to jump at the very top of the hour, but Julia and David are willing to stay on a little bit extra. So start getting questions. It's not every day you get to ask a former FBI profiler questions directly. So triple Qs for Julia and triple Qs for the retired homicide detective, and we can get more into the investigative aspects. But since Darby just has a little bit of time left, there's two comments. This one from Teresa in Ireland. Does there seem to be a lot of child murders lately? It just seems never ending. Has it always been this way? And we just have more access to these awful cases. Followed by Darby, where have all these sickos come from? Wondering if it has always been like this, or is it more in our face because of the media nowadays? And I'll add technology, Twitter, all these other means. Have things changed over time? Has it gotten worse over time?
I don't believe it's gotten worse over time. I think our access to it has definitely increased because of social media and the awareness. The rates seem to stay relatively the same in this kind of a case. Abuse or crime overall, I think that fluctuates more, but this is a pretty steady state incident.
Julia, to you, you were talking about the interviews. So Stephan Sterns did a bunch of interviews, or a couple of interviews with Jennifer Soto right after her disappearance, before the body was found, and they were interesting. But in one of them, he pulls up like a stool behind her, and he literally sits. Stephan Sterns sits in frame, in the camera, in the frame of the shot, behind her. It almost looks like he's like a bouncer. I've said this before, at a bar. Very interesting body language, like he's trying to control the narrative from sitting behind her. I don't know if you saw that interview, but if you did, what you made of it, or just hearing me describe it.
I did see it, and of course I was looking at it through the lens of what he's been charged with at this point, but I still thought it was odd behavior. And I think even not knowing the history, I would think he's lurking behind. It is odd behavior. It's not like he's sitting there as a concerned parent right next to her. He's behind her. It's lurking. It's like, should I be involved? Should I not? He doesn't really know what to do. It's strange, odd behavior. Creepy.
Yeah.
A
Darby,
technical term.
Darby, this will be the last question I throw to you because I know you have to go. From Ida Shaw, JD, meaning she's a lawyer. Is it possible that Madeline threatened? We talked about this before, that this 13th birthday was kind of the trigger, but that Madeline threatened to finally tell her mom, and that's what triggered his actions, playing devil's advocate with mom, that somehow she did not know. Have you given any more thought to this 13th birthday party? And maybe now that she was becoming a young woman, very young, maybe she wanted to speak up, and that was not going to happen as far as Stephan Sterns was concerned.
You know, it is plausible. Like, I don't really know, so I can't say it's not plausible. I don't believe that that's what happened, because he always had the ability to control her, or it wouldn't have happened from 8 up to 13. And as you talk about the last question you answered, Julia, where he really had this kind of controlling, lurking power, as Jennifer speaks, there's obviously a stance of, you know, he's kind of controlling things. She'd better be a little careful, or he's watching what the situation is. I do not believe that that's what happened. If the mother had rage because her daughter was having sexual interactions with her boyfriend, I feel that's more plausible. This is pretty disturbed. I don't think a mother cannot know. Think of your 8-year-old, your 9-year-old. They don't know. A kid that age doesn't know about, or shouldn't know a lot about, penetration or any kind of oral, physical, and there seem to be pictures of that. So an 8-year-old might just mention that without even knowing they're not supposed to, or it just slips out. Stuff like that comes out all the time. Kids at that age are not really strong inferential thinkers. So something would come out to cue a mom, what's going on here? This isn't right. There's got to be body signs. I wonder if the child withdraws when he comes into the room. Is their head always down? Are they always withdrawn? I don't know. There's got to be signs. I'm not going to give the mother a pass.
Before Darby leaves, I want to build upon that, and I want her to hear this just because I think it builds on what she's saying. But one of the things that I think would be important for investigators to look at is, and this also builds on what David was saying, but the stressors, what's going on in each of their lives at the time. Are there stressors that might have led to this? So going back and doing a complete history of what's leading up, because that's what we look for in people, like, or their stressors. Or something at the job? Is there something in the relationship? Is something falling apart? Is something particularly bad for one of them? And that might give some indication of who might potentially be the one responsible.
I think that's really important because, again, they said the mother wasn't at the birthday party. What mother isn't at their 13-year-old's birthday party and has the boyfriend there? There's just something here that's not, there's not a connection.
Yeah. This is a difficult question to ask, but I think it's important. This will be the final one, Darby, I promise. But what about pain in that area here? Wouldn't she have complained to her mother? Is that something that most young children who are abused, that they would go to the mother and say, Stephan's hurting me, something along those lines?
We hope that is what we raise children to do. But in these cases, most often a child is, threatened and told that it's not okay. And she's getting to the age, remember, by 13, where, and I want people to hear this really carefully, it might feel not as painful, right? I'm not saying she's asking for it. I'm not saying she would like it. But once there's hormones and things that are being, surging, it might be different. And she doesn't know. This is very abnormal. She doesn't know what she's supposed to feel or what is supposed to happen. She's clearly being given messages and told that this is normal behavior. So we have to be really careful about that. Just out of the blue, yes, a child would go and say, this is what happened and it really hurts. But this is a prolonged thing. And Maddie Soto didn't understand it. And that's, it's actually sickening.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, it's not her role to understand it. The whole thing is, and when I, talk about the physical pain, it's just, it's honestly, it's tough to stomach it. But Darby, always appreciate your insight on these difficult conversations. And we've got to, I don't know, maybe do one show that's not true crime so we can actually not have all these heavy topics. But Darby, I appreciate you. And I'll be in touch with you because I want to run something by you as well. But thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Talk to you soon. I'm just going to bounce Darby out of here real quick. There, she bounced herself out. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate that comment. So this is another thing that Ida Shaw brought up here. A single mom with 2 jobs, which is, I believe, Jennifer did, I believe, have a couple of jobs. Not uncommon. Some people work multiple jobs to make ends meet. That complicates the situation. That, unfortunately, is the harsh reality of life, where sometimes people, they've got to earn. I had an Uber driver the other day who was, like a PhD student by day, getting a PhD, but having to drive an Uber to pay for graduate school. You just never know. It's hard. People have a lot that they are dealing with. Here's the timeline of the investigation. Just curious to either of you. February 26th, Madeline reported missing. February 28th, massive search for Madeline underway. More than 50 people are deployed to look. Stephan Sterns arrested 2 days later. March 1st, Madeline's death declared a homicide. Madeline Soto's body is recovered. Timeline's quick, David, and the arrest was fairly quick, but these homicide charges are still pending. So you talked about it earlier, but what's your primary belief as to why? What do you think is a primary sticking point right now with why he hasn't been charged?
It's interesting. I'm sure that, when we saw his perp walk, if you will, when he came out of the back of the sheriff's station, he was wearing that white Tyvek suit, which means his clothing was taken into evidence by the sheriff's office. And I'm absolutely certain that the sheriff's office would have also authored a search warrant to collect any biological evidence from him. Pretty invasive examination of for genetic materials, hair, swabs of his private parts, and everything. I mean, there's just nothing that wouldn't be any trace evidence, right? So all that stuff would go to the lab. Any evidence from Maddie, her fingernail scrapings, swabbings of her sexual assault kit, any swabbings of her neck, anything that could have he could have touched that would not be easily explainable. But it's been March, all of March and half of April. So we're going on about 6 weeks. So I would suspect a lot of those lab results have been either concluded or in the final phases of, validation, not validation, but, confirmation, because all the lab results have to be, peer reviewed and all that stuff, especially in a high profile case like this. So we should be coming to the point now in the next, now or by the end of April, where those lab results should come back. And if there's any biological evidence implicating Sterns or the mother, that could maybe be part of what they're waiting for.
From Alice Ryder Feld here, Julia, to you, I'm curious about your take on this. Stephan Sterns did not want a 13-year-old young woman, so he got rid of her. He wanted a little girl. Where does that fit into the whole profile of this person?
Well, oftentimes child sex offenders do have a preference, the age range. And if she's growing out of that, I don't see that as a necessary or as a motive for murder. Typically, an offender who has a preference will just maybe move on to another child, or in a lot of times, and I'm not saying that Stearns has this, because we kind of talked about he might be a situational offender versus somebody who always has like a cycle and they're grooming a child as another child ages out. But typically when children age out, they're not murdered by the person that has been abusing them. So I don't know that that would be the sole motive. It's possible. We just don't know. I believe it's likely something else, as opposed to she's just now turned 13 and she no longer is in that age range of what he prefers. I think it's much more complicated than that.
I'm just looking at some of the comments. Jessica Park further down says that Jen Soto had more of a motive, in my opinion. I'm curious what Jessica Parks thinks that is. But from Rambling Mama here, and by the way, I'm going to play the 911 calls in a moment, but you've got a retired FBI profiler and David Nutting, retired homicide detective. If you have questions, now is the time. Triple Q. Soon they will be gone into the ether, never to be able to be asked a question until the next time they are on this show, or if you're listening to the Consult podcast. But Rambling Mama, this is a Julia question, I think. What do you think the motivation of criminals like this are? Power, depravity, etc. It was so gross to see him complaining. I didn't catch this, about sleeping on the jail floor, like he thinks he's the victim here. I guess he was whining about that. But what do you make of this question, Julia?
I agree. Power, control, humiliation might play a part in this, and clearly self-centered. He's been arrested for some of the most heinous crimes he could be arrested for, and he's concerned about his bed and he's complaining about it. He doesn't really grasp the concept of what has happened. It's all like what's being done to him, why is, and that doesn't surprise me, because oftentimes people who commit these crimes are very self-centered, selfish people. And you will see this type of behavior outside of their criminal behavior as well. People, as they start to gather information about him, you're going to learn a lot about him, and you're going to learn that other instances where he has shown a lack of care for other people. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some examples of him overreacting to things and being overly sensitive about things and playing the victim, and he might have a little bit of a persecution complex. Everything happens to me. That wouldn't surprise me if these stories start coming out about him.
Julia, it's a good thing my mom is not here, who hosts sometimes, because she might say I have some of those issues, complaining too much, some of the persecution. But trust me, I'm okay. I'm just glad she's not here to exacerbate the situation. Cynthia Sweecy, I'm a real single mom with no help from anyone, and not even the bio father. I live in poverty and am poor, but grateful that my daughter and I are safe. No man is worth the risk. Parents need to do better. I'm glad to hear this. I'll make my own comment here. I live in the world of Miami, which is basically like living on Mars. But there's people here with tremendous wealth, and they're horrific parents. They're not involved. Being a wealthy person or a poor person doesn't, I don't think, necessarily affect, the kind of love you give your child. But I'm just glad to hear that you're aware of this and you're giving your kid the love and attention that your child needs. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of wealthy children end up beyond. All you have to do is look at Hollywood for that. Back to this Autopsy. So David Nutting, the body of 13-year-old Madeline Soto, as we know, was found in a grassy area in Osceola County. And the medical examiner now has basically publicly said that they're not going to be able to release any info on her death, because she is a minor and it is related to DV. This crime is related to DV. Fox 35 actually spoke to the state attorney in Orlando, Andrew Bain, and he basically went on to say, and this is a direct quote here, and so the integrity of our cases depends on that information not being really available, because the last thing we need is all what we saw with our cases, when you have to go out and find jurors from different jurisdictions, and you have to, bring in jurors to try a case, because the case has become so well known to the people in the community that we cannot present a fair trial. So we want to be able to present a fair trial. We want a case to be tried by the people of our circuit, and the people of our circuit to determine what's the best result for that case. So there's two factors here. One, obviously, is the autopsy results. They're not going to release those. The other thing is, in general, he doesn't want to release too much information because he doesn't want to taint a potential jury pool. Does that all make sense to you?
Well, it does, but by the time we get to jury selection, it's all going to be public. So it's just a matter of kind of kicking the can down the road, because if it does come to the point where Sterns is charged in Maddie's death, and everything will be a matter of disclosure, public record. So it's just at this point, it's just a matter of holding everything close until he's or he or she is charged, or one or both of them is charged. So I think it's more a point of, it's an active criminal investigation, and they don't want to release anything during this phase of the investigation, because as you know, you got the probable cause affidavit for the sexual assault charges. Certainly when he's charged, or one, again, if one or both is charged, you'll get the same affidavit in that particular case, and you'll be able to know a lot more. And that we'll have to disclose that information well before the jury selection takes place.
Yeah. Look at this. She's here. My mother is in the house. Welcome to Carm, my co-host at almost 85 years old. I think I told you, Carm and I have booked our, Julia, I don't know if you're aware, and everyone will make fun of me, but I have a book coming out about my mother in about 2 weeks' time, and we are going on a book tour. And Carm is, at almost 85, is going to be hanging with me on the road. So I'm excited. We're going to Boston, actually. So
I was going to say, if you're in Boston, I'll come visit you.
Oh, I would love that. We're actually
I'll be there.
May 15th. We're going to be at Hummingbird Books. I will send you a personal.
Please do.
Yeah, I would love to meet in person.
Yeah, I want a selfie.
Yeah, 100%. We'll do it. So a couple quick things about Stephan Sterns here, and then I promise we're going to play these 911 calls. Since his transfer from the Orange County Jail to the Osceola County Jail, as we said, he waived his first appearance and then his arraignment. He has invoked his right to counsel, and he has not cooperated with the investigation. That is according to the Kissimmee police chief. Her name is Betty Holland. Without further ado, let's play. These are 911 calls. They're heavily redacted. We don't really know who's speaking, but let's take a listen together.
Has it been, though, since you guys have last seen her?
Since this morning. She was dropped off at school this morning, and apparently she never showed up. Called everyone we knew, no one seen.
Oh, that was short. I don't know that that's officially. I mean, I'm assuming that's Jennifer Soto, but I don't know that we can say that officially because they've redacted names. Julia, I know that's not a lot to work with. I thought it was going to be a little bit longer, but anything that you gleaned from that at all?
Just right off the bat, it appears to me this caller did not drop her off at school, whoever the caller is, because she said she was dropped off at school, not I dropped her off at school, we dropped her off at school. So that would be just the first thing that stood out to me is she was dropped off at school. The pronoun is dropped, so there's some distance there potentially. So this 911 caller may not have direct information.
That's interesting. Let's play it again since it was so short, Dave, and I'll take your take on it.
How long has it been, though, since you guys have last seen her?
Since this morning. She was dropped off at school this morning, and apparently she never showed up. Called everyone we knew, no one seen.
Now, David, if that was me and my kid was missing, I'd be frantic. I mean, I'd be out of my mind. Is there anything to read into that? Very calm demeanor there. I mean, I have to say, as my mom likes to say, I'm a get hysterical. But however, when there's really pressure on me, I'm usually pretty calm. You can love her. Don't love her that much. No, you can love Carm a lot. But what about the fact that she's whoever this person is, and I think it's Jennifer, but she's fairly calm, knowing that her daughter's nowhere to be found. I don't think I'd be reacting that way.
Yeah, I mean, like another word, apparently, she's apparently didn't make it to school. That's like, and the dispatcher, the 911 call taker rather asks, so I reference you guys, like, is she already, is there something we're not hearing in the front end of that call? Why maybe she made reference to before what we were able to hear her, and maybe she's there with Stephan Sterns at that time while they're making this call together, or maybe he's on a stool behind her, like in the interview. He did seem to be a little bit controlling in that interview. He didn't sit next to her and calm her, put his arm around her. He might have been over her shoulder while she's making that call.
By the way, now that I mentioned the book, let me get it out there. It is available on Amazon right now, still for pre-order. It's going to be out in a week or two. And if you want a signed copy from Carm and yours truly, it is signed. There it is right there. Look at this. Signed. Wow. Look how quick they are. SignedSurvivorBook.com. As a matter of fact, Carm, if you're listening, we have homework to do. We have a bunch of inscriptions to sign. So I'll be at your house tomorrow. Today you got away from me. Julia, back to you. You talked about this a little bit, and I think you were talking about it in the context of Stephan Sterns speaking, but there's a part of one of these interviews where Jennifer Soto is using we and then says he. I'm not sure if it's which order it is, but there's definitely a slip up there in terms of who dropped her off at school. I mean, that has to really be honed in on. I mean, that really needs to be zeroed in on, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it was she initially said, we dropped her off at school, and then said he dropped her off. I don't know if I'm using the exact terminology, but there was a shift in pronouns, an area you want to focus on. And why is that? I don't know, but we can either assume, I mean, it's a lie. She's told one story and then changed the story. So why is she lying? Is it because he told her to say we did this? Is it because, as I mentioned earlier, impression management? She wants to appear, of course, I'm a good mom. I helped drop her off at school. Or is that a slip up? And so there's just a number of reasons, but absolutely an area of her statement that you would want to come back and focus on and really pin her down as to what happened. And to go back, the mom's timeline is so important in this. It obviously, I'm sure they're investigating both of their timelines, and that could take a long time of getting video and witnesses and trying to piece back together so that they have a really good idea of both of their movements before, during, and after the commission of this crime. What have they been doing? You have several days from, the time that she is missing until her body's found. What was going on during all of that time? This is a extensive amount of work that needs to be done. And it's really going to be important to have both of their timelines as detailed as possible. And that may or may not inform us as to which one is more responsible. And not only that, they have to, I mean, we have to, at this point, presumption of innocence, and the sex abuse is horrendous. And they have named him as a suspect. I believe, based on what we know, he has properly prioritized as a main suspect, but there's always a possibility that all of that is a red herring. Just don't laugh, anybody. But what they need to do is cover all the other leads of potential sightings of her, or I saw her in this car. They have to vet those out as well.
Right.
So,
yeah. Go ahead. David, do you want to add to that?
Just also Maddie's timeline, that's
Yes.
also very important to know. I mean, her computer, her phone, anybody she spoke to. When can they say with a high degree of certainty when Maddie was last known to be alive? And that's probably going to be via electronic means, I would suspect.
Yeah, you've got to figure they've got all the search warrants for all the digital forensics that they're doing. By the way, Julia, Dr. Ann Burgess, a living legend, will be at the book signing. She's pretty famous in your field. So
I know Ann. I've met her. I've been to Boston College and
yeah,
had meetings with her. Yeah.
she's going to be a guest of honor. And if you're there, you will be a guest of honor as well. Look at this. Is the Boston signing at Hummingbird May 15th, I believe. It will be May 15th at Hummingbird Books. And there's a link I'll put out on social, because you actually have, for this one, not all of them, but for this one, you do need to RSVP.
I just want to say I have one of Ann's books behind me, Practical Applications of Rape. Or Practical Applications of Rape Investigations. And she's a contributor and editor of that book. And I highly recommend it.
Oh, wow.
So just so you know.
The most amazing thing about Ann to me is that, and I don't think she'd mind me saying this, she's 87, still teaching full time, still working full time, and like a ball of energy. It's amazing, and like lucid as can be. I really love her. By the way, there's a Hulu series coming out about her in the second week of June, and we're going to have Dakota Fanning is doing that, and we're going to have maybe Dakota Fanning on, but definitely Ann on. To preview that the first week of June. So that'll be exciting. Speaking of the timeline, and then we'll start to wrap this up. She said, and this is Jen Soto, that the last conversation she had with her daughter happened the night before her disappearance. But Channel 9 investigated all this, and they have proof, according to them, that Soto told deputies she saw her daughter the morning of the disappearance. So goes from the night before to the morning of. She said at one point, I told her good night, and yeah, that was it. David, what about this confusion, apparent difference of stories in terms of when and where she last saw Maddie? This is a bit of a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, minutes matter in timelines, and this is hugely important. What did she allegedly leave for work and leave the two of them in the apartment alone? Is that what's supposedly happened? I don't know what.
Yeah, I mean, she said that she saw her the night before, but then the story switches. But here, Channel 9, they investigated this fairly heavily, and they said in a report they did, referring to detectives from Orange County, and here's a quote: "Our detectives have determined that Madeline was never dropped off on the morning of February 26 near her school." This is from Orange County Sheriff John Mina. "Instead, we believe she was already dead at the time, and that Stephan Sterns moved her body in the early morning hours of that day." Julia, again, the timeline is confusing. It contradicts itself as told by Jennifer and Stephan Sterns. So how do you whittle this down? How do you get to the bottom of this, Julia?
You get to the bottom of trying to check when she left for work. They're probably looking at videos, they're probably looking at digital evidence, they're interviewing witnesses who saw Jennifer when, and was she even home that night as well? Did she actually come home? Did she spend the night? Obviously there is some video in the apartment complex because they caught him at the dumpster and did see his car at some point. So are they looking at that to confirm when she was there, when she left, those things? That's the only way you're going to be able to verify. And we don't know. She might have just has a different story, but she might have said, oh, I saw her in the morning, and then she really didn't see her. And she just wants to say she saw her because that would protect Stearns and potentially protect her reputation as a mother. But we don't know. It's hard to know the reason that she's lying, but clearly she's lying, and there's a reason for that. We just don't know what that is. Yeah, but it's very concerning to me. At this point, you just want to tell them everything. That
100%. And this is where STS Nation is great. Jessica Parks. Nope, it was her sister and mom. Jen never called 911, so it was not Jennifer Soto. It was the sister and the mother, which is also super interesting. By the way, someone else was asking, Carmen and I are going to be in New York City on May 19th at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And we've got a pretty big, and I will reveal it at some point, but very well-known national news personality who's going to be moderating our debate in New York City. That's May 19th at the Museum of Jewish Heritage at 12:30 p.m. And I'll be getting links and ways to RSVP to these events, but hope to see everybody there. A final thing on this, and then we will say goodbye. Just this past Saturday, there was a community vigil held, and Tatiana Wallace, who is the stepmother and the biological father, they were there. And Tatiana, the stepmother, said, "You will always be remembered as the young girl running through pumpkin patches, learning to fish, feeding baby goats, and jumping into corn pits. When you would come and visit us, it's hard to imagine that you're gone." The vigil was actually held at the site where the body was found. A community member whose name is Ashley Omar said, "We want Maddie to know that you matter to us." And eventually they say a permanent memorial will be built. So this is obviously, anytime a young life is taken like this, these are the toughest cases to cover. This is no different. Brutal to hear some of the details. Special shout out to Darby Fox, a child and adolescent psychologist who was with us for the first hour. David Nutting, he's a retired cold case supervisor in Orange and Volusia counties in Orlando. What's next for this investigation, David?
I think the lab reports are imminent. I think it's probably going to be very important to see what, if anything, comes from those. Obviously, they shared a home together, so fiber evidence and DNA evidence is going to not be damning, depending on where that DNA evidence is located on one or all of the parties involved. So I think that's probably what they're waiting on. That's the next big thing.
We're always bringing you new best guests, and today was a special one. Julia Cowley, a retired FBI agent and profiler. She spent 22 years in the FBI investigating violent crime, including serial killings and sex offenses, white-collar crime, public corruption. The list goes on. She was also a member of the FBI's evidence response team. Prior to joining the FBI, Julia was a special agent and forensic scientist with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Julia, I have to ask you, we've been following the Sebastian Rogers case. I don't know if you have, but that's out of Hendersonville, Tennessee. And this is a 15-year-old with autism who's been missing. This is now the 7th week. And what's curious to me, the biological mother, Katie Proudfoot, and the stepfather, Chris Proudfoot, they moved. They left the house. They're in a different home. I would never, ever do that. I mean, what kind of red flag does that raise for a criminal profiler?
Well, I'm familiar with the case as well, and I would certainly have questions about that as well.
Well, I've been known to ask people to come back. I think we might be doing that tomorrow. We're still working. This is a weird week, but I won't torture you yet. But your final thoughts on this case and where it goes.
My final thoughts are, as I indicated earlier, that I believe that Stearns is properly prioritized as the main suspect. There's probably a lot of investigation left to do, and they're going to continue to investigate to the point where they can either rule him in or rule him out. I tend to believe they're going to get to the point where they can rule him in and he'll be charged. And as David was saying, this is going to depend on the lab results and the digital evidence and the witness interviews and the timelines. That's all done, and they're just taking their time to do a very thorough job. They do have a lot of time. He is being held. He's not going to get out. He's not a danger to anyone.
Huge thanks to this best guest panel. Of course, Detective David Nutting, Darby Fox was here, and this is Julia Cowley, a retired FBI agent and profiler. Got the best guests in all of true crime. Am I supposed to know? What is a GNO tour? I'm sure it's something very obvious, but I don't know what that is. But the COE will tell me because I have no idea, and I'm a little slow on the uptake, especially on. I hate Mondays, everyone. I hate Carm's going, don't whine, but I hate Mondays. I've never liked Mondays. I will never, ever like Mondays. I also don't like mornings. I like nights, but I won't bore you with all that. We are doing another show in 28 minutes. As nighttime comes, I wake up more and more. So I'll be more awake for the 7 o'clock show. I'm excited that maybe I will get to meet Julia in Boston. Thank you both for being here. And on that note, love you, America. Love you, Orlando. Love you, Massachusetts. And of course, this is what this story is all about. Coming up in 27 minutes, we're going to discuss Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly, who were taken from this earth over a custody battle in an insane story. We'll have the latest details in that case, again, in less than a half hour. Please come back and join us. Until then, see ya. Thank you, everyone.